website, we have an Indigenous festival that we are putting together that starts July 15th and will go to September 15th. We already have some musical artists that will be part of that Indigenous festival. Our entire gallery exhibit will be all current Indigenous artists. We will also have workshops, children's programs, book study kind of things, and storytelling. So stay tuned, that should be exciting 2 months later in the summer. This event, along with many events that we've already held, is part of the 90th anniversary of the Snow Train Anniversary Series. It began in December. You can visit our website and look for the little Snow Train logo right on the left. If you scroll down just a little bit right on the left, and you can see what events we have coming up for the remainder of the series. The Snow Train anniversary is actually March 4th. And on that day, we plan to Greg, what are we doing exactly? We're gonna meet at the depot at 10:30, and we're gonna ring bells. We might even have something to drink. And that's the actual anniversary of the first Snow Train. 10:30, March 4th. And we might get some historic vehicles and bring your old skis. Yeah. So there's still quite a few more exciting events as part of the series, and we're very much looking forward to tonight's presentation. So with no further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Sterling. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Just to check, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
In the back? Great, great. What an incredible turnout. We're hovering around 120 people right now, which was beyond what we expected. And I think it's a tribute to the great families that make up our community, the sacrifice that we recognize of those families, and an interesting topic, and also a great credit to Tannery Pond, which has come a long ways of late. We've been to several events here in the last few months, and some of them had 20 or 30 people, and some of them had over 100, and it's been an incredibly productive season for Tannery Pond. So they're to be congratulated. I thank Candace Murray, who was the director, Mindy Pruniger, who's the president of the Board of Trustees, is doing a fabulous job. I would recognize Kevin Bean, who's our town supervisor. He's been a tremendous supporter of our group. He's here someplace, but I don't know. He's up top. So thank you for your continuing efforts and support. I'm going to recognize a few people that are here, and I'm not going to be able to recognize everybody, but we have some relatives and ancestors of several of the soldiers that we're going to talk about here. One of the soldiers we're going to talk about is Phil Santasierra, and Phil's wife, Emmy, is here. Emmy, can you raise your hand and say hello to everybody? Wally Arnheider. Everybody remember Wally? Who lived on Circle Avenue. He was 10th Mountain Division. A lot of this is his gear on loan from his family. And several members of his family are here. Julie and Lori are in the front seats, and I don't know if there's more, but there may be. I can't try and list every frequent relative who's here.
His son is here.
Is Danny here?
Danny's here.
Oh, wonderful. Danny, where we are, thank you for coming. No family gave more. So I want to acknowledge the many children of Henry and Addie, grandchildren, cousins, nieces, and nephews. We're going to talk in more detail as we get further into the program about Carson and about some of the other siblings. But I want to thank everybody for being here, and I just want to acknowledge briefly the relatives of the servicemen who served in the 10th Mountain Division with a round of applause, if I could. It's my pleasure to introduce tonight Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Ray of the 10th Mountain Division. She is currently serving as the public officer for the 10th Mountain Division Light Infantry. She and her husband drove here in not the best weather from the Watertown area in Fort Drum today. She has a lot of credentials on her resume, which she asked me not to mention. So I'll mention the one resume stuffer that I gave her at about 5:30. I took her on a 20-minute tour of North Creek. So she's seen the ski wall, she's seen Big Gore. She understands that Gore is a word that stands for a gap in a survey, and there's actually 4 or 5 mountains up there, not just one. I told her where Basil and Woods was, because I thought that was essential. Of course, we went down and stood at the train station, and I stood on the steps where Teddy got handed the note that President McKinley was dead. And I explained the unique character of that particular place, because it's obviously history, but it's also environment, and it's also economy, and explained that's where Gore's water comes from. And it's the only place in the East Coast that has an endless supply of water for snowmaking. As was mentioned earlier, this is one event in the greater celebration of the snow trains. And Greg Schaefer has already said hello to everyone. I want to acknowledge him. The North Creek Depot Preservation Association has put on event after event after event. The last one was mentioned a moment ago, but there's also one coming up. Greg, you want to just mention the Cunningham event?
On Sunday, March 3rd at 3 o'clock, we're going to have a conversation with the Cunninghams. They're going to talk about how Butler Cunningham began essentially the first ski shop in the country and how it lasted for decades and decades until today. So, conversation with the Cunninghams, Sunday, March 3rd at 3 o'clock right here at Tannery Pond. All invited.
Thank you much. So the unique aspect that we're looking here tonight is we have an interaction between a recreational sport, skiing, and winter warfare. And what happened in the 1940s is we ended up as a nation state having created the most incredible fighting force that consisted largely of skiers, mountain climbers, rock climbers, and woodsmen. It's my pleasure to introduce the Lieutenant Colonel to say a few words about the 10th Mountain Division.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to begin by saying thank you so much to the Johnsburg Historical Society for hosting events like this. To the President of the Johnsburg Historical Association, Sterling Goodspeed, and to Miss Dina, the Treasurer, thank you for working with my team to facilitate us being just a small part of this event tonight. I'd also like to thank the North Creek Railway Depot Preservation Association for supporting tonight's program. Over the last several days, as Sterling mentioned, I've learned that where we stand holds some pretty amazing history. I've learned that not only is North Creek home to soldiers who served in the 10th Mountain Division during World War II, it's also the very same place where then Vice President Teddy Roosevelt was delivered the news that President McKinley had died of his wounds and he would be the next in line to lead our nation as Commander-in-Chief. I have learned just a little bit of the history of Private First Class Carson Freeburn, a 10th Mountain Division soldier killed in Italy just months after his brother died in battle fighting the Germans on their home turf. Coming from a family of 12 siblings, Carson was a well-liked young man who managed the hardware store just down the road that I got to see this evening. And we'll have the chance to hear more about his life in a little bit. This is truly a community that celebrates its rich history, and to the very important members of that community, Dan Freeburn, son of Private First Class Freeburn, Miss Jill Swinton, niece of Private First Class Freeburn, Miss Emmy Santicero, wife of Philip, and Paul Sunricker, and all the family members and descendants that are here in this room today. Please just give yourself a round of applause. I am grateful and truly humbled to be here today as part of the 90th anniversary of the historic Snow Train celebration, as we honor the legacy that connects this community with the soldiers, past and present, of our division. On behalf of Major General Greg Anderson and the entire 10th Mountain Division, thank you for allowing me to take just a few minutes of your time. Earlier in the evening, I had the chance to make my way through the various displays of our soldiers who have served in the division, to see pieces of what made them who they were as individuals. Seeing snapshots and personal items, I'm so grateful to know that because of all of you in this room, those stories will never be forgotten. I know that most people in this room are well aware of the roots of our connected past, but allow me to provide some context that illuminates the depth of this relationship. You will be hard-pressed to attend an event that celebrates the legacy of the division without finding yourself shoulder to shoulder with members of the National Ski Patrol. Numerous veterans and soldiers across the country have proudly volunteered for service in both the Army and the National Ski Patrol, as there is a shared spirit of service in the mountains that will forever link the National Ski Patrol to our division. A spirit that, at the conclusion of World War II, inspired and swelled the ranks of the National Ski Patrol with 10th Mountain Division veterans, who in turn grew a permanent presence and aided in establishing a community in North America, inextricably linking who we are with the outdoor community. You probably know this, but more than 80% of resorts across North America have been founded by, managed by, and employed our soldiers of the 10th Mountain Division. Additionally, our veterans have led the way in developing avalanche science and the establishment of the National Outdoor Leadership School, or NOLS to those who know it. We are grateful for what our veterans, in partnership with those in this room, have built. You all continue to embody the spirit of resilience and pride. Again, please take a moment to give our descendants, our veterans, and everyone in this room a round of applause. While we take this evening to honor where we come from, I celebrate the opportunity to share with you where we are and where we're going as a division and as an Army. Today, as in our past, our 10th Mountain soldiers are tough. They are mentally and physically prepared to execute operations in complex terrain anywhere in the world. We are America's only mountain division, activated on July 15, 1943, to serve as an elite alpine unit capable of fighting in high mountain environments during World War II. Back then, the War Department recognized the need for a mountain unit that could survive in austere conditions, forging heavy equipment for agile, lethal ground troops. Today, the 10th Mountain Division continues to honor its alpine origins with specialized training that prepares our soldiers for rapid deployment missions anywhere in the world. Our soldiers are equipped with specialized skills for operations in rugged terrain and cold climates. They stand ready to face any challenge that may come their way. From joint exercises in multiple countries across the globe and multinational collaborations in alpine environments, the 10th Mountain Division strengthens its capabilities while proudly contributing to the mountaineering and ski community. Much like the individuals who boarded the snow train, which gave them access to a challenging and exciting environment, 10th Mountain soldiers of today are highly skilled, trained, and motivated. And what this really comes down to, the final thought I'll leave you with this evening, is that we are the People's Division. We were envisioned by you, the American people. The 10th Mountain Division was built upon mountain climbers, skiers, and alpinists. Humans such as Charles Minnie Dole advocated for the need of an organization with the capability to operate in alpine environments. As we speak, soldiers of the division are out in Colorado alongside other members of the National Ski Patrol and our descendants. There they honor the training conducted at Camp Hell, Colorado that prepared our alpine soldiers for combat operations during World War II. The training our soldiers conduct today sharpens and hones the skills that allow us to prepare for the future light fight. Our commanding general, Major General Greg Anderson, likes to remind us, we don't know what our next Riva Ridge will be. We don't know what that will look like, none of us do. Whether you currently serve our nation in the ranks of the division or you serve in another capacity, you don't know what Riva Ridge will be erected for you to overcome. We will all face challenges. It won't look like it did in Italy, but there are challenges ahead. We are building the Mountain Alpine into light infantry and creating the type of soldiers and leaders that will overcome whatever River Ridge comes their way. In closing, I'd like to thank you all again for your time this evening and for the ongoing relationship that exists between the 10th Mountain Division of today and you. You are why we serve. Climb to glory.
So the next part of the program says notes from the Forgotten Front. And what I want to do is briefly go through, touch on a little bit of 10th Mountain history, and explain a little bit about what the Italian campaign was all about. I'm going to try and do that in like 5 minutes, 5.5 minutes. It is one of the most complicated historical things I've ever looked at and tried to analyze. So it's multifaceted, it's got many layers to it, it's complicated. There are 3 different brigades or divisions, which we have members representing each that we're honoring tonight. There's disputes between the Allies, but what it really starts out with is Minnie Dole approaching military leadership and ultimately meeting with General George Marshall in the fall of 1940. And he said, I think we need a mountain division to fight. This is 1940. And he didn't get an answer. So he went away, and he got increasingly depressed as he looked at the U.S. military, and he didn't think that they would be able to be a formidable force in the event of a European campaign in the winter months. He was very impressed, and some of the other military leaders were very impressed as the war began. The Soviets attacked Finland, and there were trained Winter Rangers in Finland, and they destroyed the Soviets, who had larger numbers. So that sent a message. Another odd thing I came across is that a couple of the military elites, again, well before Pearl Harbor Day, theorized that if there was going to be a war, and it was going to be a Hitler-based European war, and they were going to attack North America, a likely methodology for that attack was the St. Lawrence River. And so some of this came from the notion of how are we going to defend the St. Lawrence in a winter attack, which is fascinating. I'd never realized that or thought of it. Minnie Dole was a lobbyist for this group. He was the head of the National Ski Patrol, and finally the 87th Mountain Infantry was activated on November 15th, 1941, just 3 weeks before Pearl Harbor. Dole was tasked with finding citizen volunteers. They were good skiers. They were people who climbed mountains for fun, people who did things like free climb ledges that were straight up and down, and they were also woodsmen and trappers and people who knew the outdoors. There were also many college educated in the 3 brigades, more than any other part of the military at that time. It's the first time, and to my knowledge, the only time in United States history that a civilian entity was responsible for approving applicants for a military operation. Think about how unusual that is. The ski patrol picked the Army. It's really kind of amazing. The first group began training at Mount Rainier, and I'm skipping over a bunch of things, but during the same time, Camp Hale in Colorado, which would be their permanent home, was under construction. Shortly thereafter, the Army activated the 85th and the 86th Infantry units, and the 87th saw almost immediate action in the Aleutian Islands, where the Japanese were thought to be. So the next chapter of this is a controversy between the Allies. Winston Churchill was right about a lot of things, but I learned in preparing for this that Winston wasn't right about everything. Winston thought that Italy was the soft underbelly of Hitler's Europe, and he argued vehemently with Roosevelt and the other allies, let's attack them in Italy, immediately throw them down, fight them from the sea, fight them on the land, bomb them from the plains, and we'll advance up Italy into Europe. He had no idea what the soldiers were going to confront. It was incredible terrain, mountainous, sometimes 5 to 7 feet of snow, horrendous conditions, supply chain problems, etc. So the initial groups that went in did a little better than a stalemate. The compromise that evolved with the Allies was, we'll give Winston his way, and we'll go into Italy first, maybe not with as many people as we should. And then ultimately, we'll do what the Americans want to do, and when the army gets stronger and stronger and stronger, we will invade France. And that was D-Day. So with D-Day happening in June of '44, and the Italian campaign being already underway, it came to be known as the Forgotten Front. D-Day got the headlines, and D-Day was hell. And I know there's people in this room whose ancestors were wounded there. But Italy cannot be forgotten, what the men faced. I'm going to give you a quote for what it was like when they first sort of got on the ground there. This is Lieutenant Colonel Henry J. Hampton. The Germans held all the high ground, and one felt like he was in the bottom of a bowl, with the enemy sitting on 2/3 of the rim, looking down upon you. There was about as much chance of concealment as a goldfish would have in the bowl. So that's what the Americans entered into. Those first groups basically fought to a stalemate. And that stalemate's important, and I'm going to come back to it at the end. It was not all for naught, it was important. Ultimately, they began to dispatch the 10th Mountain Division. Previously, they'd been in the Aleutians, and the new brigades had been training. And I would urge you, when you go to the next room where so many of the displays are, all the way on the left wall, we chronicle the stages of the invasion. And each battalion has a different color. I think it's blue, red, and green. And it's showing, for example, the 86th attack on Riva Ridge. And then if you go to the next group of maps, it shows where they went from there, where they went from there. And what they're ultimately all trying to do is get to what's called the Po Valley. Because if they can get to the Po Valley, then they can attack all of Italy and then, you know, fulfill Winston's dream. But it was not an easy go. So we have the 3 divisions all ending up there. That's the 87th, the 85th, and the 86th. And what they determined their first priority was to take Mount Belvedere. It was an incredible lookout and an incredible high ground sort of area to control that part of Italy. There was a problem. And that was, in order to get Mount Belvedere, you had to take Riva Ridge. And Riva Ridge was a nightmare. Initially, members of the 86th Battalion, a group of scouts, free-scaled cliffs at night to survey the numbers of Germans and Italians there, what the lay of the land was, and so on, and then quietly climbed back down those cliffs. After they reported to their commanders, there was some additional training, and on February 18th at 7:30 p.m., the 86th launched an attack on the ridge. Depending on what part of the ridge you were going up, it was between 1,700 and 2,000 feet in the dead of winter in the snow. The members of the 86th, I find this amazing, they were ordered not to fire on the fire. I've even found some comments that many of them were ordered not to load their weapons. Why? The theory was that a single German machine gunner who was talented could get a line and lure them out by returning shots and kill all of them, destroying the unit, the element of surprise, and the entire Italian operation. They took Riva Ridge in approximately a day, and almost simultaneously to that, the 85th and 87th attacked Mount Belvedere. It was a brutal battle. It went for 6 days of heavy fighting. There were back and forths. There were supply problems. I've read accounts of what the meals were like, when you ate, how you ate. You were outdoors, and you're going to hear some specifics from some of the soldiers themselves about what it was like to try to sleep at night and hear the artillery in the distance and wonder what was going to happen next. So they took Belvedere, and the three brigades began to kind of snake their way up mountains, down, up mountains, down, up mountains, down, and they're working their way in and then up Italy. And there came a time when they had to try and bring it all home, and that's called the breakout. It was a spectacular offensive. It was launched, I believe, April 1 of 45. It was village to village, it was house to house combat, and it was brutal. And it was brutal. So I thought the other morning when I got up and walked the dog at 2 below, this isn't too bad. The breakout was successful. By the end of April, they emerged into the Po Valley. They sent the Germans and the Italians running, and the Germans ultimately surrendered in early May the entire Italian operation. So they accomplished incredible things in a few months, and at grave risk. There were 20,000 men in the 10th. 1,000 were killed in these battles. Approximately 3,900 were injured, and most of them injured quite badly. So the question is, what was accomplished? And some very important things were accomplished. Even before the 10th got there, the Allies were putting in enough men. It's a hard concept. They knew they couldn't win. But they were putting in enough men so the Germans couldn't fall back to other positions and ultimately strengthen France. So it was almost a diversionary tactic for a while. But when the 10th arrived, it was like they came in on horses. And they really helped take the place. They staged the breakout, and they forced the surrender. The 3 battalions of the 10th beat the stalemate back because they were skilled winter soldiers. Not only were they trained in this country, but they were training for the weeks in Italy. Even while they were under fire, they were still training with their commanding officers. And because of the breakout in the Po Valley, the Germans fully surrendered on May 2nd, and the war was nearly over. It would be done shortly. So complicated, and I have been superficial and overly simplistic. You know, there's one Belvedere, there's 25 mountains that we're talking about. We're talking about hell on earth is what we're talking about, that they went through. And you're going to hear some first-hand words from someone. They were strong men. They were determined men. They loved their family. Some of them really loved North Creek. And they talked about it. So I want Dina to come up and talk about the soldiers themselves and give a few facts and details, sort of a biographical sense of their lives. Dina?
Good evening, everyone. What my job was to research the men from this area, from the town of Johnsburg, not just North Creek. There were a couple that were from the rest of the town, and put their stories together at least enough so that if you decided you'd like to find out more, you can research. Some of the resources I use a lot are Ancestry.com, of course, newspapers.com, New York State historic newspapers, and the Fulton Historic History. It's a Fulton postcards, they call it a lot, but that's where you find the Warrensburg news. So, in doing this, it's bits and pieces. There's a notebook about everyone that I've researched and on the tables with some of their information in it. And if you're interested, I'd be glad to help you find more. I'm going to start, I put it in the order that I believe they enlisted in. So the first one from North Creek who enlisted was Arnold William Alexander, and his father was one of the 3 Alexander brothers who started the garage, that was right here, where this is. So he enlisted, he was born in 1916, I've got the registration papers, they all had to do the selective service registration, so he did that in October of 1940, and his induction was July 9th, 1941. When he went in, he did his training at, his basic training at Fort Dix, and when he went in, he didn't, well, I guess he did. He went to Fort Lewis, Washington. Fort Lewis is where the Mount Rainier troops were, and they trained at Mount Rainier. But the problem with Mount Rainier was that it was a national park and there were no guns allowed because of the animals. They were afraid of the animals. So the Army decided to build a camp, and that's what they built in Colorado, Camp Hale in Colorado. And it was, I think, 9,000 feet where the city, the basic city that they built was, and the mountains were up to 12,000. So, but he went to Fort Lewis, Washington, and he went into officer training, and so he was in officer training, and he ended up going to Camp Hale when they moved there. But there's details. I don't want to go into everything now because we can talk about that in there, and we don't have that much time. But he was a member of the American. He was a member of the American Ski School instructors. So he was an instructor and a member of the Four Mountain Ski Club. So he ended up being recognized, of course, for that. Now the 87th division or 87th regiment, I mean, they were known as a three-letter regiment. And the reason they were called that is because in the beginning, when the National Ski Patrol started recruiting, and they reached out to all the ski clubs, and the men had to get three letters of recommendation, and the ski clubs had to recommend them to the Army. And two people did that from here. Perry Ellers, who many of you might remember from up on the river. He had a sports shop up on the river, and there was a section in the river called the Perry Ellers. And I've got to tell you this, it's embarrassing, but I'm going to tell you anyway. When I grew up out at Garnet Lake, I didn't go up to North River a lot. I had no idea that there was a man named Perry Ellers. I thought that the Perry Ellers was a geological term for the way the water ran over the rocks in the river. So when I became a historian, someone inquired about Perry Ellers, so then I had to learn about it. So Perry Ellers and Richard Yeager. Perry Ellers was 40 and Richard Yeager was 20 when they went into the military. They went in together. They went to basic training at Fort Carson, Colorado, which wasn't very far from where Camp Hale was. And they both went into the 87th Regiment. Perry got ill over the winter, and he ended up coming home. That was 1942. He ended up coming home on April 1st of 1943. But Richard Yeager stayed in the military. He went to the Aleutians. When the 87th was sent to the Aleutians, when they were sent to Kiska, they thought the Japanese were still there. So they get there, and the Japanese are gone, but they're coming ashore, and they're in friendly fire because one side didn't know the other that the Japanese had left. But what happened to Richard Yeager at there was that he was injured by a landmine. So but he got better, and he came back, and he ended up going to Camp Hale. They both did, Perry and he both were at Camp Hale. And then he ended up, apparently, I couldn't find exactly where, but in his obituary it says he was at the European Theater also, and that he had 2 Purple Hearts. So, look at their information out there. There's more out there. Philip Santicero was from Belrose, New York, down on Long Island, and his wife Emmy is here with us tonight, and his daughter, I'm sorry, your name slips my mind.
Ellen.
Ellen? Okay. So anyway, Philip and Emmy started coming to town of Johnsburg and settled out at Garnet Lake part-time in the late 1960s.
Yes.
And then by the late 1980s, they built a house here and remained here. And since Philip has passed on, Emmy lives down in Glens Falls, or Queensbury. But Philip, we're very fortunate here in a small town that we had a newspaper. And there were and we had Glens Falls, North Creek, and Warrensburg newspapers, because when I went to research Philip Santasero, it was very hard to find any information except for what I got from Emmy. And of course, she helped me a lot. So he was he was in the 87th, he was at Camp Hale, and he was at Italy, at Belvedere and River Ridge. Right, Emmy? So make sure you look at his information. There's more in the folder. There's some photos of him from Florence, Italy, when he was over in Florence. And Emmy, they married after the war. He was single during the war. And Arthur Gibb Draper was born in Brooklyn, but he had a love for the outdoors, and throughout his life, he had a lot of education. His father was a New York Times editor or something. I can't remember now exactly. But anyway, he was a reporter. Arthur was a reporter for the New York Times. But he loved the outdoors. So he found out, he applied for a job as forest ranger, and he came to North Creek as a forest ranger. Lower pay, but he wanted to be outside. So he was in the 86. These first men were all in the 87th. Arthur was in the 86. He was awarded a battle medal in Italy, and what was the name of it? In the Apennines, anyway. It was in that area. He was at I guess I didn't write it down here. Oh, here it is. Monte della Terraccia, Italy, which is one of the part of that River Ridge area. So, and what I found interesting is when I found his obituary, which most obituaries probably aren't as interesting to people as they are to a historian, but you find out an awful lot about someone. And he died of a heart attack at 51 years old, and he was living at Old Forge at the time. But he was the manager of Whiteface Mountain. He just wanted to be outside, and he loved the outdoors so much and learned so much that he became the manager there. But he was at, while I'm looking at this, Camp Hale was way up in the mountains, cold. Camp Swift was in Texas. These men from the 10th Mountain Division, I think it was, some of them went earlier, some of them went in September, but some of them went in October, November of 1944. They were moved to Camp Swift, Texas, and I know Lori and I were talking about this, with her dad was there, and about the desert conditions compared to where they were. It was 100 degrees different in temperature. It was amazing, and they had to do the training there before they sent them to Italy, so it's amazing. But anyway, Arthur was in Italy. His information is out there along with the rest. The next two I found by accident. These aren't people I knew were in the war at all. They were both lived in Minerva at the time they joined. But Merton Beecher Hayes was born in Riparius. And I know that Joan said she knew the Hayes family. I couldn't find a picture of him, so there's no picture in there. But he was at Camp Hale. But in one of the news articles says he was still cooking, not skiing. He was a cook, one of the cooks. And there's an article in his notebook that he wrote about the day in the life of a cook. So it's at Camp Hale. So that's pretty interesting. But he did end up staying in Minerva, or I think Olmstedville actually, which is part of Minerva. So his information is in there. I don't want to spend too long, and Sterling's got more to tell us about. And then his brother-in-law, Roland Paul Sear, lived in Minerva at the time he joined, but he's moved in the 1950s, he's moved his family to Baker's Mills. So I went to school, some of us in here went to school with some of the kids, some of his children. But he was in Italy. He was his basic training, Camp Carson, 86 Mountain, Camp Hale, moved to Camp Swift with the rest of them. In December of 1944, he was in Italy with the 86 Mountain Division, or infantry. And he received medals over there, and that's all in his story in the notebooks. I didn't put it in their fact sheet because I needed to kind of keep it short and sweet. And then Luther Waldron, I stuck him in here, and I kind of got stuck on him for a while because I found it interesting. He was stationed at Camp Hale in the 87th, but he wasn't always there. So where he started out, now Luther Waldron was one of the many Waldron brothers. There was 3 of them in the military at the same time. Daniel Vincent. Vincent raised his family on Osborne Street, and his family still, some of them still live there, was a prisoner of war in Germany. And he was in the Air Force. But something about Daniel, or Vincent, that I found out was that he was sent to Camp Hale at one point, and I think must be to do some special training before they sent them to the Europe. I'm not sure, I didn't study on him, but I worked on Luther. So anyway, Luther was in the 73rd Engineers, and he was stationed in the Aleutians, and then he was stationed at the, I can't think of the name of the place. Anyway, it was northern Alaska, and it was where they started building the he helped build the Alaskan Highway. His engineering, his company helped build that, and there's a little bit about that in there. Then he was transferred in 1943 to the 87th at Camp Hale, and then he got injured. He injured his knee, and he ended up being able to be discharged on medical discharge. Wally Arnheider. Same thing with Phil Santarat, with Wally, that was with Phil. Wally was born in New Jersey. He signed up in New Jersey. He was inducted in New Jersey, March 7th, 1941. He was at, this is something we found out this week. We found a picture, I found a picture of a unit, 34th Infantry from South Carolina, Fort Jackson, and he was in that picture. So I've put the picture in his notebook because he ended up at Camp Hale in the 85th and was sent to Italy, Riva Ridge and Belvedere, along with the other, with his units. So he after the war, he moved up here, and he said Jerry Stahl. Some of people know who Jerry Stahl was. He came up here with Jerry Stahl, and he ended up meeting this beautiful lady from North Creek, Ann Elizabeth Prescott. And she was 17. Oh. So they married and had 5 children. 5 children, 4 daughters and 1 son, right? And the family still lives here, part of them. So Lori and I grew up together. So anyway, he was at Riva Ridge and Belvedere, and I wish I had more information, but we're going to work on that. All these items, except for the uniform on the end, the skis, the sled, this fleece that would go under a parka of some kind that was white. There's some there is a picture in the book out there, and all that was his, and Lori has kept it over the years, so we were very thankful that she was able to loan that to us. And then, now we come to, I just want to talk about one more thing, and then Sterling is going to tell us about Carson Friedman. There were some other people, I told you about Vince Waldron. We all called him Vince. His name was Daniel, but I never knew it was Daniel until I started doing this. We always called him Vince. He and my dad were friends. Anyway, Fred Vetter from Chestertown, who Emmy knows. You said you know Fred. He was in 86, and he was stationed at Camp Hale also, and in Italy. And then Fred Harrison, who was in the 76, did mountain training, similar to what they did at Colorado or Fort Lewis, at Camp McCoy, Wisconsin. So there are just a couple other men to keep in mind. And then, so Sterling, I'm going to turn this over to Sterling, and he's going to tell us about Carson.